All right, welcome back everyone to the large group. We're going to have a few presentations about the new material for today, starting off with Terry Harding at the City. Terry, go for it. About 15 minutes total, I think, for all the presentations in this period, and then about 5 minutes for Q&A.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome back, everybody. It's great to see your faces. And so glad that we have more light in each day. I'm starting to feel that lift in my mood of spring. So first I want to introduce another staff member that's supporting the city tonight. It's Jennifer Knopp. Hi, Jen. Wave. Jennifer is an urban designer and city planner on my team, and she's going to be with me in one of the breakout groups tonight. And then our consultant, Matt Hasty, will be in the other breakout group later. So one thing I wanted to talk about real briefly here up front is give this group some feedback on your second report. So what was useful, what was not so useful for this process. And first I want to say the whole thing was useful, but in particular, the rigorous process used by this group, the careful deliberative work, the very strong themes that emerged from the principles you all wrote and presented to us, and then how it was shared through videos, the report itself, and through visits from members of this panel to the Planning Commission, and hopefully in the future to the City Council. Those are really critical ways that the effects of your work can be felt into the future. So I just want to thank you for that. And on the other side, nothing was useless. Everything had value in your report. But some of the things that we're sort of storing away for future consideration are the things that are not directly related to the Middle Housing Project, like some of your ideas about homelessness support strategies. Definitely all of your work on public engagement recommendations are going to be forwarded on to other city processes. So I just wanted to say that. And then the second thing I'm going to talk about is where we are in the process of city staff developing recommendations that will be forwarded on to our Planning Commission and City Council. So as you probably know, right now, city staff and the project team are working through a large list, I would say, of code recommendations with this group, the other outreach groups, and the Planning Commission this month, this spring, really. So we're both presenting the culmination of this project up to this point and discussing it with all of these different groups and getting feedback on whether the code recommendations that we've come up with match the principles and the input that you gave in the fall and in February. We will be bringing an update to the City Council at the end of May. And then once we've shared the status of the work with them, city staff goes kind of away to prepare an official package of code language. And then we take that and present it to both Planning Commission and City Council through a series of meetings called the Plan Adoption Process. And that will include public hearings in the fall. And so if you have any questions about that, you can ask us in the small groups or ask me during the Q&A here. But the next thing that we're going to talk about right now is I'm going to ask Matt to go over some of the key questions that were in the memo that was mailed to you. And in order to set him up for that, I'm going to share my screen. So bear with me while I get this all set up. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if it's sharing my, well, what do you guys see? Can you see my?
So kind of like the whole thing.
We don't want that. Hold on.
But it's also kind of okay.
This is probably better.
Ooh.
Yeah, really?
Yes, it's small, but yes, that's the slideshow itself. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Little,
Okay.
I'm gonna just kind of quickly walk through these key questions that we've talked to you all about before. We talked to the Planning Commission about these and let you know kind of where we're landing in terms of an initial project team recommendation in order to then, get some more feedback from folks. And then we'll talk about some of the details of these things, how they apply to different types of housing, and get into more specifics when we do the breakout groups. So one of the questions was just in general, where do we think we should be landing in terms of the allow versus encourage versus incentivize approaches that we talked about last time? And what we heard pretty overwhelmingly from you, from the community, from the Planning Commission was we should be somewhere between encourage and incentivize. And so that's really where we're heading. There are some kind of exceptions to that, and we'll talk about those in more detail in the small groups. But in general, we are particularly on the things that have the biggest impact on kind of flexibility and cost of housing. That's what we're recommending. So next one. And so one of the other questions we asked is particularly for lot sizes, the minimum size of a lot somebody can develop middle housing on, and some of the specific other standards in kind of generally in the city, in the majority of their residential zones, where are we headed? And here it's some combination of encourage, so encouraging middle housing by allowing for smaller lot sizes and relaxing some of the other development standards. And then in areas in close proximity to transit, frequent transit lines, within a quarter mile of those frequent transit lines, further reducing the size of lots that can be built on and further relaxing some of those key standards, particularly things related to the height of development and parking. Parking can have a big impact on cost and on just the amount of land that's available to actually put the housing on. So that's where we're headed there. One of the questions was what approach should we use for design standards? And so here our starting point are the design standards that are in the model code. They relate to things like percentage of windows on the part of the building that faces the street, how you locate parking and garages and the width of driveways, things that affect kind of the pedestrian environment. And I'll say that the model code sets the bar kind of low on those things. They're a pretty limited and pretty basic set of standards. And so we don't see a lot of opportunities to reduce those standards just because there aren't very many of them and they're already pretty limited. So for the most part, we're adapting those standards from the model code, but we are proposing relaxing them in some places and then also making sure that they fit up with Eugene's development code. So that's one where when you see the details, you might see those things more in the allow column than the encourage or incentivize column later. One of the questions was, should the city permit both attached and detached plexes, so duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes? And the recommendation is yes, the city should allow both of those forms of plexes, really to provide more flexibility generally, but also particularly to make it easier to add another unit to a property where there's already a home. And then the other question was, should we talked about cottage cluster developments last time, kind of the base option for those is to have all the cottages on one piece of property, one lot, but the city can also allow each cottage to be on its own piece of property. So that was a question we asked, should we allow both of those things? The answer has been yes, why not? That provides for more flexibility and also improves sort of opportunities for those cottages to be ownership rather than just rental housing. It just makes that easier. And so that's the recommendation there, is to allow for both options and write both types of standards into the city's code. And so that's my hopefully pretty quick presentation on those general questions. And again, we'll get into some of the details of those in the breakout rooms as they apply to specific types of middle housing.
Perfectly timed. Thank you so much, Matt. All right, so we've got a few minutes for questions here. And again, we're doing this iteratively, so no need to get all of your questions out on the table now. You'll dive into more details in a moment. You'll have some more time to read. But any questions at this stage for Terry or Matt about kind of the general recommendations? Yeah, Erin, go ahead. And actually, before you speak, Erin, just a reminder that the way we're taking questions is by raising your hand, which now lives under the reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So go for it, Erin.
I found it. My question is, what is a cottage and how is it different from a house?
So cottage clusters are, there's a number of things that define them. One, it's multiple small houses. So it is essentially a house, but it's a small house. It can't be larger than 900 square foot in terms of the footprint of the house. And the cottages have to be oriented around a common courtyard area. Those are kind of the two of the main definitions or defining characteristics of cottage clusters. There's some other things too, but that's kind of how the state defined them. And then the model code has a number of specific requirements related to providing pathways between them, kind of how you can locate parking. Often you're providing sort of shared parking, so you're trying to consolidate that in one part of the site, and there's some other standards as well. But the defining characteristics are really the size and the orientation around that common courtyard.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Jose.
I have a question about the map that was presented in the slide. At the beginning of this process, we were shown a similar map with how single-family housing zoning has been up until now and where the more dense housing currently exists. How does the city's recommendation, as shown in this map, change or keep the same the way that a multifamily housing is distributed across neighborhoods?
That's a great question. I'll give an answer, and then I think we'll probably also want to discuss this again, because it's probably a many-part question. In general, the city's proposal, and Matt, jump in here if you want to, but we need to follow the adopted administrative rules, which do require us to spread all of the housing types around the entire community. And so there won't be any neighborhoods that don't have middle housing. They're all going to be zoned to allow it. And then the transit map that was shown is places where the city is thinking about incentivizing additional density through smaller lots and potentially incentives that we haven't gotten to talk about much yet. And I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, if we don't have any other questions immediately, I think we'll move right along into kind of the second round of deeper presentations. And for this, we're going to be splitting into two groups based on two categories of housing types. And I'll let Lynn describe that, and then we'll go into two larger groups.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, this, as I mentioned, there's sort of too much here for everyone to handle everything at the same time. So we're trying to break it down a little bit by splitting into these sort of two halves of the recommendations. As I said, you all received, most of you received in the mail, sort of the first half, and some of you will be in that group. That's on duplexes and cottage clusters. And the second half on triplexes, fourplexes, and row houses will be a second half. And so this next period will be sort of special presentation time directly related to those two categories of housing types. And then we'll come back for a little bit more silent reading and kind of debriefing the information a little bit later on. But let's go into those two big